Owen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked his compass one more time. The Scottish Highlands stretched endlessly before him, all rolling green hills and ancient stone. After 8 years of guiding tourists through these mountains, he thought he knew every path and hidden valley. Today was different, though. Today he was alone, just him and his backpack, taking a few days to clear his head. The morning had started perfect. Clear blue sky, gentle breeze, and the kind of silence that only comes when you're miles from civilization. But now, dark clouds were building on the horizon and Owen could feel the temperature dropping. He picked up his pace, knowing from experience how quickly Highland weather could turn nasty. That's when he heard it. A scream pierced the quiet air, sharp and desperate. Owen froze, his military training kicking in automatically. Sound traveled funny in these mountains, bouncing off rocks and echoing through valleys. But this wasn't an echo. Someone was in real trouble. He dropped his heavy pack, keeping only his medical kit and water, then sprinted toward the sound. His boots pounded against the rough ground as he jumped over streams and dodged between ancient oak trees. The scream came again, weaker this time, and Owen adjusted his direction. "Help! Please, someone help me." The voice was female, young, and filled with panic. Owen pushed harder, his lungs burning as he climbed over a rocky ridge. On the other side, he spotted movement near a pile of weathered stones that might have once been a wall. A woman sat on the ground, her back against a large boulder. Even from a distance, Owen could see she was hurt. Her right leg was stretched out awkwardly, and she was pressing both hands against her thigh. Dark hair had escaped from her ponytail and hung around her pale face. "Hey," Owen called out as he approached. "I'm here to help." "My name's Owen." The woman looked up, relief flooding her features. "Thank God," she breathed. I thought no one would find me out here." Owen knelt beside her, immediately noticing the 2 small puncture wounds on her leg just above her hiking boot. The skin around the bite was already turning red and beginning to swell. His blood ran cold. "When did this happen?" he asked, pulling on latex gloves from his medical kit. "Maybe 20 minutes ago," she said, her voice shaky. "I was taking photos of the old stones when I heard rustling. I looked down and saw this snake. Dark-colored, maybe 2 feet long. I tried to back away, but I tripped and it struck." Owen nodded grimly. "Adder bite. You're going to be okay, but we need to get you help soon." He looked into her eyes, checking her pupils. They seemed normal, but that could change quickly. "What's your name?" he asked while carefully examining the wound. "Nina," she replied. "Nina Campbell." "All right, Nina, I used to be a medic in the army, so I know what I'm doing. But I need you to stay calm and follow my instructions exactly." "Can you do that?" She nodded, though Owen could see the fear in her green eyes. "Good. First thing, we need to clean this wound and keep your leg still." Owen worked quickly but gently, cleaning the bite area with antiseptic. The venom spreads through your lymph system, so the less you move, the slower it travels. As he worked, Owen noticed things that didn't quite add up. Nina's hiking gear was top quality, the kind that cost serious money. Her boots alone probably cost more than most people spent on their entire outdoor wardrobe. But more interesting was how she carried herself. Even hurt and scared, there was something almost regal about her posture. "You're not from around here," Owen observed, wrapping the wound with clean bandage. "What makes you say that?" Nina asked, though her accent had a careful quality to it, like she was concentrating on how she spoke. "Lucky guess." Owen didn't push. People came to the Highlands for all sorts of reasons, and most of them weren't looking to share their life stories with strangers. The first fat raindrops started falling just as Owen finished treating the bite. He looked up at the darkening sky and cursed under his breath. "We need shelter," he said. "Can you walk?" Nina tried to stand but immediately stumbled. Owen caught her before she could fall. "The venom's affecting my balance," she said, frustrated. "That's normal. Here, lean on me." Owen supported her weight as they started moving. "Is there anywhere nearby we can take cover?" Nina was quiet for a moment, then pointed toward a cluster of pine trees about half a mile away. "There's an old cabin past those trees. My research brought me through this area yesterday. It looked abandoned but sturdy." Owen was impressed by her knowledge of the terrain, especially for someone who claimed to be visiting. But as the rain started coming down harder, he focused on getting them to safety. The walk took nearly an hour. Nina's condition was getting worse. She was pale and sweating despite the cold rain, and Owen had to practically carry her the last few hundred yards. Several times she mumbled things that didn't make sense, talking about the papers and Uncle Robert's men. Just the venom, Owen told himself, though something nagged at him about the way she spoke, like she knew more than she was letting on. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines that provided some shelter from the wind. It was old but solid, built from local stone with a slate roof that had survived decades of highland weather. Owen was surprised to find the door unlocked. Inside was basic but clean. One room with a stone fireplace, a simple bed, and a small table. Someone had been maintaining this place, though it clearly hadn't been used in months. Owen helped Nina to the bed and immediately started checking her vital signs. Her pulse was elevated and her skin felt clammy. The bite area was definitely more swollen now, and he could see red streaks starting to spread up her leg. "We need to get you to a hospital," he said, "but not in this storm. We'll have to wait until morning." Nina grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "No hospitals," she said urgently. "Please, I can't." "They'll find me there." "Who will find you?" But Nina had closed her eyes, her breathing becoming shallow. Owen spent the next few minutes making her as comfortable as possible, elevating her leg and covering her with the cabin's old blankets. As he built a fire to warm the room, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled into something much bigger than a simple snake bite. Nina's expensive gear, her knowledge of hidden cabins, her fear of hospitals, and those strange comments about papers and someone's men. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains and rain hammered against the windows. Whatever secrets Nina was carrying would have to wait until morning. Right now, his only job was keeping her alive through the night. Owen settled into the chair beside the bed, keeping watch over his mysterious patient as the storm raged around their small shelter. Owen barely slept that night. Every hour he checked Nina's pulse and temperature, watching for signs that the venom was spreading faster than her body could handle. The old cabin creaked and groaned under the assault of wind and rain, but it held firm against the highland storm. Around midnight, Nina started talking in her sleep. At first, Owen thought it was just fever dreams, the kind of nonsense that comes when someone's body is fighting poison. But as he listened closer, her words seemed too specific, too detailed to be random. "The papers are in the North Tower," she mumbled, her eyes moving rapidly behind closed lids, behind the loose stone, third row from the top. "Uncle Robert can never find them there." Owen leaned forward, adjusting the damp cloth on her forehead. "Nina, can you hear me?" "The castle. It's mine by right," Father promised. "The bloodline goes back 700 years. Her voice took on a strange accent, older somehow, like she was speaking words passed down through generations. Owen had heard plenty of people talk nonsense while sick or injured. But this felt different. There was a certainty in Nina's voice, a deep knowledge that seemed to come from somewhere real. "He thinks I'm just a foolish girl," Nina continued, her hands gripping the blanket tightly, "but I have the documents. I have proof. The clan will know the truth." The word clan made Owen pause. In these parts of Scotland, clan heritage still mattered. Some families could trace their lineage back centuries, with claims to land and titles that most people thought were just history book stories. But every now and then you met someone for whom those old claims were very real. Nina's fever broke around 3 in the morning. Her skin cooled and her breathing became steadier. Owen allowed himself to relax slightly, though he kept checking on her every 30 minutes. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind clear skies and the fresh smell of rain-washed earth. When Nina opened her eyes, they were clear and alert. She looked around the cabin with obvious confusion. "How long was I out?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Most of the night. How are you feeling?" Owen handed her a cup of water from his canteen. "Terrible," she admitted, trying to sit up. "But better than yesterday. The bite still hurts, but my head feels clearer." Owen nodded. "The swelling's gone down some. You were lucky the bite wasn't deeper." Nina looked down at her bandaged leg, then back at Owen. "You saved my life. I don't know how to thank you." "No need. Anyone would have done the same." Owen studied her face in the morning light. Yesterday's panic was gone, replaced by something more guarded. "You said some interesting things during the night. About papers and a castle." For just a moment, something flickered in Nina's eyes. Fear, anger, then her expression became carefully neutral. "Fever dreams," she said with a slight laugh. "I probably so." "Sounded completely mad." "Maybe. Or maybe you were talking about something real." Owen kept his tone casual, but he was watching her closely. You mentioned Uncle Robert. Is he someone who might be worried about you? Nina was quiet for a long moment, sipping her water. I suppose you deserve some explanation, she finally said. After everything you've done. She set down the cup and looked out the cabin's small window at the mountains beyond. I'm here doing research on Highland clan history. There are family connections I'm trying to understand, but it's complicated, and some people don't want me digging into old records. It was a reasonable explanation, but Owen noticed what she didn't say. No mention of where she was from, what kind of research, or who exactly didn't want her looking into these records. That explains the expensive gear, Owen said. Research grants must pay better than I thought. Nina glanced at her hiking equipment, scattered around the cabin from the previous night's rush to get dry. Owen saw her notice his attention and quickly pull her hands inside her sleeves, but not before he caught sight of something interesting. On her right hand was a ring that definitely wasn't standard hiking jewelry. Even in the dim cabin light, Owen could see it was old gold with some kind of engraved design. Something like that, Nina said vaguely. Owen decided not to push further. Everyone had their secrets, and Nina clearly wasn't ready to share hers. But his curiosity was definitely piqued. Well, regardless of why you're here, we need to get you to a doctor, he said. Snake bites can have delayed effects. I feel fine now, Nina protested. Really, and I have more research to do in this area. Research that involves climbing around old ruins by yourself? I'm usually more careful. Nina stood up slowly, testing her weight on the injured leg. See? I'm much better. Owen watched her move around the cabin. She was definitely improved, but there was still a slight tremor in her hands, and she favored her left leg. More concerning was her obvious determination to avoid medical attention. At least let me walk with you back to wherever you're staying, Owen offered. Make sure you don't have any complications. Nina looked like she was about to refuse, then seemed to change her mind. That's kind of you. Actually, I'm not exactly sure where I am right now. Yesterday got a bit confusing. Owen pulled out his map and compass. We're here, he said, pointing to a spot about 5 miles from the main hiking trail. Where did you start from? Nina studied the map for several minutes, her finger tracing different routes with a familiarity that surprised Owen. For someone who claimed to be lost, she seemed to know the terrain remarkably well. Yes, I came from this direction, she said, pointing to a path that would have brought her from the east. There's a place I'm staying, but it's not exactly on any tourist maps. What kind of place? It's old, very old. My research focuses on structures that most people don't know about anymore. Owen nodded, though he was becoming more convinced that Nina's research was personal rather than academic. The way she spoke about these places, the obvious wealth, her knowledge of the landscape, and her fear of being found all pointed to something much more complicated than a simple historical project. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Owen noticed Nina carefully checking her pockets and pack. She seemed to be looking for something specific, and when she didn't find it, a flash of real worry crossed her face. Everything okay? Owen asked. Yes, just making sure I have what I need. But Nina's hands were shaking slightly as she shouldered her pack. Owen helped her secure the cabin, making sure they left it as they'd found it. As they stepped outside into the bright Highland morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Nina was really doing out here, it was dangerous. And not just because of the local wildlife, the question was whether he was helping her or walking straight into trouble himself. The morning sun felt good on Owen's face as they left the cabin behind. Nina moved carefully but steadily, though he noticed she kept looking over her shoulder as if expecting to see someone following them. Which way? Owen asked, consulting his map. Nina studied the landscape for a moment, then pointed toward what looked like impossible terrain. That way. Owen looked where she was pointing. Instead of the obvious path that led back toward the main trail, Nina wanted to head directly into a maze of rocky outcrops and thick brush. Are you sure? That's going to be rough going, especially with your leg. I'm sure. Nina's voice carried a confidence that made Owen look at her more closely. There's a path through those rocks. It's not on any map, but it's there. Owen had been hiking these mountains for years, and he'd never seen a path in that direction. But Nina was already walking toward the rocks with the kind of certainty that only came from personal experience. How do you know about this path? He asked, catching up to her. Research, she said simply. But Owen caught the slight hesitation in her voice. As they approached the rocky outcrop, Owen was amazed to see that Nina was right. Hidden between two large boulders was a narrow gap that opened into what looked like an ancient track. The path was overgrown with heather and bracken, but it was definitely there. "This is incredible," Owen said, running his hand along what might have been a stone marker. "This looks old. Really old. Probably centuries," Nina agreed. "These mountains are full of forgotten paths. People have been walking through here since long before roads were built." They climbed steadily upward, following the hidden track as it wound between ancient stones and twisted through groves of rowan trees. Nina moved with surprising confidence for someone who claimed to be visiting the area. She knew exactly where to step to avoid loose rocks, and she seemed to anticipate every turn in the path. "You've been this way before," Owen said. It wasn't a question. Nina paused at a small clearing where the path split in two directions. She looked genuinely conflicted for a moment. "Yes," she finally admitted. "I have. When? As a child, my father brought me here sometimes. Family trips." Owen sensed there was much more to that story, but before he could ask, Nina had already chosen the left fork and was walking away. The path led them higher into the mountains, through terrain that wasn't marked on any tourist map Owen had ever seen. They passed the ruins of what might have been an old settlement, just foundation stones and the remains of walls now covered in moss and wildflowers. "Who lived here?" Owen asked. "My people," Nina said quietly, then seemed to realize what she'd revealed. "I mean, people from this area. Clan families. Before they were forced to leave." Owen knew the history. The highland clearances had driven thousands of families from their ancestral lands in the 18th and 19th centuries. But the way Nina said "my people" suggested something more personal than historical interest. They had been walking for about 2 hours when Nina suddenly stopped. She held up her hand for silence, her head tilted like she was listening for something. "What is it?" Owen whispered. "Voices," she breathed. "Coming from that direction." Owen strained to listen but heard nothing except wind through the heather. "I don't hear anything." "Trust me." Nina's face had gone pale. "We need to get off this path. Now." She led him quickly away from the track, scrambling up a steep slope toward a cluster of standing stones on a small hill. Owen followed, though he still couldn't hear whatever had spooked her. From behind the ancient stones they had a clear view of the path below. Owen was about to ask Nina what they were hiding from when he saw them. 3 men in dark suits were walking along the track they had just left. In the middle of the Scottish Highlands, miles from any road, these men looked completely out of place. They moved with purpose, checking some kind of device that Owen realized was a GPS unit. "Who are they?" Owen whispered. Nina's hands were shaking. "People who shouldn't be here." One of the men stopped almost directly below their hiding spot. He spoke into a radio, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. No sign of her on the main trails. "Expanding search to the old paths." "Understood," came the reply through the radio's static. "Mr. Henderson wants her found before she reaches the property. Use any means necessary." Owen felt Nina tense beside him. The man with the radio continued speaking. "GPS shows she was in this area yesterday before the storm. If she's following the old routes, she could be anywhere. She knows these mountains better than any of us," another voice said through the radio. "But she's on foot and injured. Keep searching." The 3 men continued along the path, their voices fading as they moved away. Owen and Nina stayed hidden behind the stones for another 10 minutes before Owen was convinced they were gone. "Nina," Owen said carefully, "I think you need to tell me what's really going on." Nina was staring in the direction the men had gone, tears running down her cheeks. "I can't. If I tell you, you'll be in danger too. I think I'm already in danger. Those men were looking for you specifically, and they mentioned you being injured and knowing these mountains." Nina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's complicated. Try me." For a long moment, Nina said nothing. Then she seemed to come to a decision. "My name isn't Nina Campbell," she said quietly. "It's Eleanor. Eleanor Mackenzie." The name hit Owen like a physical blow. Everyone in the Highlands knew the Mackenzie name. One of the oldest clan families in Scotland, with bloodlines that went back to the medieval period. But the Mackenzies lost their lands generations ago. "That's impossible," Owen said. "The Mackenzie line died out decades ago." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "It didn't. My grandfather hid the truth to protect the family. But I'm the last direct descendant, and I'm the rightful heir to everything that was taken from us. Heir to what? Eleanor pointed toward a distant peak where Owen could just make out the outline of a structure against the sky. To that, Mackenzie Keep, and to thousands of acres of highland territory that my family has owned for 7 centuries. Owen stared at the distant castle, his mind reeling. But if you're the rightful heir, why are men in suits hunting you through the mountains? Eleanor's face hardened. Because my Uncle Robert thinks he can steal what belongs to me. He's been managing the estate since my parents died, and he's found ways to make himself very rich from lands that aren't his. If I can prove my identity and claim my inheritance, he loses everything. And those papers you mentioned in your fever? The ones hidden in the tower? Proof of who I am. Birth certificates, genealogy records, legal documents that show the true line of succession. My father hid them before he died, knowing Robert would try to destroy any evidence of my claim. Owen looked back toward where the men had disappeared. So Henderson works for my uncle, along with corrupt lawyers and officials who are getting rich off stolen clan land. Eleanor's voice was bitter. They've been trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so Robert can take control permanently. Yesterday I finally found the documents I need to stop them. But the snakebite happened while I was retrieving papers from a cave near those old stones. Robert's men must have been closer than I thought. Eleanor looked at Owen with genuine fear in her eyes. If they catch me before I can get those documents to the proper authorities, I'll disappear. Maybe permanently. Owen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Highland wind. He'd stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple rescue. But looking at Eleanor's determined face, he knew he couldn't walk away. Then we better make sure they don't catch you, he said. Owen followed Eleanor down a steep slope that seemed to lead nowhere. For the past hour, they had been climbing through terrain that got more difficult with each step. His legs ached and his lungs burned, but Eleanor moved ahead of him with the sure-footed confidence of someone who had walked these paths many times before. How much further? Owen asked, pausing to catch his breath. Not far now, Eleanor replied without stopping. Just past that ridge. Owen looked up at the rocky ridge she was pointing toward. It looked like a dead end, just another wall of highland stone stretching up toward the clouds. But Eleanor had been right about everything so far, so he kept following. As they climbed higher, Owen noticed something strange about the landscape around them. The rocks seemed to be arranged in patterns that looked almost deliberate. What he had first taken for natural formations now appeared to be the remains of very old walls and structures. This whole area was once part of the castle grounds, Eleanor explained, noticing his attention. What you're seeing are the outer defenses, built to make anyone approaching think they were just climbing through natural terrain. Clever, Owen admitted. No wonder your family held on to this land for so long. 700 years, Eleanor said with pride in her voice. Through wars, famines, and political upheavals. The Mackenzies endured because we understood these mountains better than anyone else. They reached the ridge, and Owen expected to see another stretch of highland wilderness beyond. Instead, he found himself looking down into a hidden valley that took his breath away. The valley was roughly circular, surrounded by high peaks that sheltered it from view in every direction. Ancient pine trees covered the slopes, and a small stream wound through the center, feeding a crystal-clear lake. But what dominated the scene was the castle. Mackenzie Keep rose from a rocky island in the center of the lake, connected to the shore by a narrow stone causeway. The castle was massive, its towers and walls built from the same gray stone as the mountains around it. Unlike many highland ruins, this one had been maintained. The walls were intact, the towers still had their roofs, and Owen could see glass in the windows. It's incredible, Owen breathed. I can't believe this place isn't on any tourist maps. That's intentional, Eleanor said, starting down the path toward the lake. My family has always kept the castle private. Too much history here, too many secrets. As they walked across the causeway, Owen felt like he was stepping back in time. The castle had probably looked much the same when it was first built centuries ago. Up close, he could see that while the structure was ancient, it had been carefully restored. The stonework was solid and everything looked well maintained. Someone's been taking care of this place, Owen observed. A small staff. People whose families have worked for the Mackenzies for generations. They've been waiting for me to come home. Eleanor led him through the main gate into a courtyard surrounded by high walls. Owen was amazed to see gardens planted with vegetables and herbs, and several outbuildings that looked like they were in regular use. How long since you've been here? Owen asked. 3 years, Eleanor said quietly. Not since my parents' funeral. They entered the main hall through heavy wooden doors that must have been hundreds of years old. Inside, Owen found himself in a room that belonged in a museum. Tapestries hung from the walls. Ancient weapons were displayed above the massive fireplace, and portraits of stern-faced men and women in Highland dress watched from ornate frames. My ancestors, Eleanor said, noticing his attention. Every clan chief and chieftain going back to the 14th century. Owen studied the portraits, seeing the family resemblance in Eleanor's sharp cheekbones and determined expression. And you're next in line? I'm the last in line, Eleanor corrected. When my parents died in that car accident, the direct bloodline came down to just me. She led him up a winding stone staircase to one of the towers. The room at the top was clearly being used as an office, with modern computers sitting incongruously among ancient furniture. This is where my father did his work, Eleanor explained, managing the estate, keeping track of the clan's holdings and investments. Owen looked out the window at the valley below. What kind of holdings? Eleanor pulled out a thick folder from a desk drawer. This is what Uncle Robert doesn't want anyone to see. The true extent of what the Mackenzie clan owns. Owen opened the folder and found himself looking at legal documents, property deeds, and financial statements. Even scanning quickly, he could see that the numbers were enormous. The clan owns over 50,000 acres of highland territory, Eleanor explained. Not just empty mountains, but forests, mineral rights, and some of the most valuable development land in Scotland. There are also investments, trust funds, and properties in Edinburgh and London. How much is it all worth? Conservative estimate? About £200 million. Owen nearly dropped the folder. 200 million? And Uncle Robert has been systematically stealing from it for the past 3 years. He sold off parcels of land to developers, emptied trust accounts, and even mortgaged parts of the castle grounds, all while claiming to be the temporary guardian of an estate that belongs to a mentally unstable niece. Eleanor pulled out another set of documents. These are the papers I retrieved from the cave yesterday. Proof that Robert has been forging documents, bribing officials, and even threatening people who questioned his authority. Owen studied the evidence. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, emails discussing bribes, and legal documents that had clearly been altered. This is enough to send him to prison. If I can get it to the right people, Eleanor said. But Robert has connections throughout the legal system. Judges, solicitors, even some police officials. He's been very careful to build a network of people who benefit from keeping me away from my inheritance. Owen understood now why men in expensive suits were hunting Eleanor through the mountains. With this much money at stake, Robert wouldn't hesitate to use extreme measures. What's your plan? Owen asked. Eleanor walked to another window that looked out toward the main gate. I've been in contact with someone Robert can't touch. A prosecutor in Edinburgh, who specializes in clan inheritance fraud. She's been investigating similar cases throughout Scotland. When are you supposed to meet her? Tomorrow. But I have to get these documents to her personally. Robert's people have been intercepting my mail and monitoring my communications. Owen looked at the evidence spread across the desk. Do you think he knows you have this? He knows I've been searching for it. That's why his men are out there. Eleanor's voice turned hard. Robert thought that by isolating me and spreading rumors about my mental state, he could keep me from ever challenging his control. But he underestimated how much my father taught me about these mountains. A sound from the courtyard below made them both freeze. Voices were echoing off the castle walls, getting closer. Eleanor moved quickly to the window and looked down. Her face went white. They found us, she whispered. Robert's here himself. Owen joined her at the window. In the courtyard below, he could see the 3 men in suits from earlier, plus several others. Among them was an older man in an expensive coat who carried himself with obvious authority. Robert Henderson, E. Leaner said with contempt, My dear uncle. Owen counted at least 8 men in the courtyard. Is there another way out of here? Eleanor was already moving, gathering up the documents and stuffing them into a waterproof bag. There's a passage that leads to the old dungeons. From there, we can reach the lake shore without being seen. And then what? Eleanor slung the bag over her shoulder and headed for a section of wall that looked solid, but turned out to have a hidden door. Then we make our stand, she said grimly, because I'm not running anymore. The voices from below were getting louder and Owen could hear footsteps on the stone stairs. Whatever happened next, there would be no more hiding in the mountains. Eleanor pressed a stone in the wall and a section swung inward, revealing a narrow passage lit by dim bulbs. Owen followed her into the hidden corridor, amazed that the castle had been wired for electricity. Solar panels on the north tower, Eleanor explained quietly as they hurried through the passage. My father was always ahead of his time. The passage led downward through the castle's foundations, past empty chambers that must have once been dungeons. Owen could hear voices echoing from somewhere above them. Robert's men searching the upper floors. This way, Eleanor whispered, leading him through a low doorway that opened onto a rocky ledge beside the lake. They were hidden from the courtyard by the castle's walls, but Owen could see boats moored at a small dock. Robert had come prepared for a siege. He's brought enough men to surround the entire island, Owen observed. But he doesn't know about the tunnel, Eleanor said, pointing to what looked like a natural cave opening at the water's edge. It connects to the mainland under the lake. Before they could move toward the tunnel, voices echoed across the water from the main gate. Eleanor. Robert's voice carried clearly in the mountain air. I know you're here. Let's end this foolishness and talk like civilized people. Eleanor's jaw tightened. 3 years too late for civilized conversation. Your poor mental state has been a concern for everyone who cares about you, Robert continued, his tone dripping with false sympathy. But I'm here to help. Come out and we can discuss getting you the treatment you need. Treatment? Eleanor muttered angrily. He means a private facility where I'll be kept drugged and isolated while he finishes stealing everything. Owen watched as more men appeared around the courtyard. They were trying to look like concerned family friends, but Owen recognized the careful positioning of trained security. We could try to reach that tunnel, Owen suggested. No, Eleanor said firmly. I'm done running. She stood up from their hiding place and called out across the water. Hello, Uncle Robert. Nice to see you too. Robert appeared on the castle's main steps, flanked by his men. Even from a distance, Owen could see the family resemblance. Robert had the same sharp features as Eleanor, but his face was harder, more calculating. Eleanor, dear, you've had us all terribly worried. 3 years of wandering around, living rough, avoiding your responsibilities. Robert's voice carried the perfect tone of a concerned guardian. But it's time to come home and let the family take proper care of you. Funny thing about family, Eleanor called back. I've been learning a lot about mine lately. Did you know that clan records show the Mackenzies have owned this land since 1324? Continuous ownership for 7 centuries. Ancient history, my dear. What matters now is your health and well-being. Eleanor reached into her waterproof bag and pulled out the documents. I also learned that since my parents' death, over £40 million has been transferred out of clan accounts. Money that belonged to me. Owen saw Robert's expression change. The false concern was replaced by something much colder. You always were too interested in matters beyond your understanding, Robert said. That's part of your condition. My condition? Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. The only condition I have is being too trusting, but I'm cured now. She held up the documents so Robert could see them. Bank records, land transfers, forged signatures, bribery payments. Everything you've done for the past 3 years, all documented. Robert's men started moving, spreading out around the island's shore. Owen realized they were being surrounded. Those documents are obviously forgeries, Robert said smoothly. Another symptom of your paranoid delusions. But don't worry, we'll make sure you get the help you need. The same kind of help you gave the Stewart family when they questioned your land sales? Or the MacLeod clan when they wanted to audit their trust accounts? Owen saw Robert's mask slip completely. Enough of this nonsense. Bring her to me. The men started moving toward their position, but before they could get far, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the valley. Owen looked up to see 2 aircraft approaching fast, flying low between the mountain peaks. Eleanor smiled for the first time that day. Right on schedule. The helicopters landed on a flat area near the lakeshore, and Owen watched in amazement as armed police officers poured out, followed by people in business suits carrying briefcases. Police Scotland Financial Crime Unit, Eleanor explained, along with Crown Prosecution Service investigators. A woman in a dark suit walked up to the water's edge and called across to Robert. Robert Henderson, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Please remain where you are. Robert's face went white. This is ridiculous. I'm the legal guardian of a mentally unstable young woman. These people are trespassing on private property. Property that belongs to Eleanor Mackenzie, the prosecutor called back. We have court orders, Mr. Henderson. And we have your financial records. Owen watched as Robert's men looked uncertain, clearly not prepared for this level of official intervention. Several of them were already backing away from the water. Eleanor cupped her hands around her mouth. Should I tell them about the offshore accounts, Uncle Robert? The ones in the Cayman Islands? Robert's shoulders sagged. He knew he was beaten. The next hour passed in a blur. Police boats crossed the lake to arrest Robert and his men. Eleanor met with the prosecutors, turning over her evidence and providing detailed testimony about her uncle's crimes. Owen stood to one side, amazed by the transformation in Eleanor's demeanor. Gone was the frightened woman he'd rescued from the snakebite. In her place stood someone who clearly belonged in the halls of power. How did you arrange all this? Owen asked when Eleanor finally had a free moment. I've been planning it for months, she admitted. The prosecutor, Janet Morrison, has been building cases against corrupt guardians throughout Scotland. When I contacted her 3 weeks ago with evidence about Robert, she was very interested. But why all the secrecy? Why not just go to the authorities immediately? Eleanor looked across the lake where Robert was being loaded into a police boat. Because Robert had friends in the police, friends in the courts, friends in the government. Janet needed irrefutable evidence before she could move, and I needed to get that evidence without anyone knowing. The snake bite was just bad luck, terrible timing. But it worked out. Eleanor looked at Owen with genuine warmth. If you hadn't found me, I never would have made it to that meeting with Janet. As the sun began to set over the mountains, the last of the police boats departed. Owen and Eleanor stood on the castle steps watching the helicopters disappear beyond the peaks. So what happens now? Owen asked. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, looking out over the valley that was once again peaceful. Now I rebuild. The clan, the estate, the trust that was broken, it's going to take years to undo the damage Robert caused. That's a big job for one person. Eleanor turned to look at him, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I was hoping it might be a job for 2 people, if you're interested. Owen looked around at the ancient castle, the pristine valley, and the woman who had turned out to be so much more than she'd first appeared. I think I could be convinced to stay, he said. Eleanor's smile widened. Good, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning of our adventure. As darkness fell over the highlands, lights came on in Mackenzie Keep for the first time in 3 years. The castle that had stood for 7 centuries was finally home to its rightful owner again.